Okay, so to render a sequence out of Solaris, so we did all this work. Now, how do we get stuff out of here? So I'm going to explain it using this Karma node because all the options are here, but it's basically the same for all these other options, which we already said this is the same. In the render product here, we can set the camera and the resolution. In the render settings, we can also set the camera and the resolution. So make sure you have the last node you're rendering, basically in this case, I think, or both nodes, just pointing to the frame camera and same resolution, so you don't have any issues with happening here. In this case, I'm going to explain it with Karma, but in this render wrap, USD render, there's also the options to set the current frame, etc. So let's just do it here. So here, if you are not familiar with Houdini, we have a bunch of buttons to render here in the top. So one renders to disk, which basically says just save the files to your hard drive. Render to mplay is just the Houdini mplay. Houdini mplay is basically just a sequencer, or not a sequencer, just an image reader that can play back images. When you can render to that if you are not sure about what you are going to be outputting out. We can actually just click here and let's just change this resolution to 1920. Here it also has this drop down to select some specific resolutions. I can set the camera here. Let's render camera 2, and let me just set the rendering samples to, let's say, 16 to have a render that goes pretty quickly. And I'm gonna set render to mplay, and that is going to be rendering. So the same thing here in images. Whatever this output picture is, it's now selected to IP, which basically means render to the interactive previewer. You can see here, if we drop this down, it's basically sending it to mplay. Or you can send it to a sequence of images, which that's what I want. So let's select EXR. You don't have to select that, but it just shows you the path, which was we're gonna be saving the files to. And I'm gonna explain some of the important parts of this path. The first thing is the heap. If you are not familiar with Houdini, heap is just an environment variable, and this means whatever this file is saved, this is where this is the path that it's starting from, basically. And then there should be a render folder, and then this is the name of the file you're gonna be saving to. If we middle click on the name, you can see that's the result of this path. You can see how that evaluates to, or where to it's evaluating to. In my case, I don't like this to have this heap name and you can also create folders here just by putting a name. Let's say I want to say test or sequence 1, and then / that will create that folder if it doesn't exist. And let's say Karma render shot 1. This is actually shot 2. Then I'll put a dot, and then this is really important part. It's the sequence numbering in this sequence of images that we're gonna have, right? Because some programs, like I think Nuke, uses just numbers like this, and then you put EXR after that, and this will be how much padding you were gonna have in this file. Some applications use for the like that, for 4 numbers padding, or some just zeros like that. In Houdini, we use a dollar symbol F for frame, and then a number, and you can set the padding there. You can set 6, it's going to be 6 numbers padding, or 4, more common is 4. So this is how you set your padding there, and if you don't have this expression there, this is going to be saving every frame in the same image on top of each other. So you're going to have just a render of many hours with 1 frame of result, which is not going to be fun. So make sure you always have this F. If you don't put any padding, it's don't have any padding, because I always recommend you have padding at least 4, depending on how much images you're going to render. let's say I'm gonna render from 1 to 120 frames. Okay, so how do I set that? Well, up top here is the render range. So right now it's just rendering the current frame, which actually just finished here a few minutes ago. This is the in-play window. This in-play window, you can see, has a slider here or a timeline. You can just scroll when you have render like a sequence to this, and then you can also just save this sequence to disk or export it to some kind of a video file if you need to. It's really good for testing stuff out before you just send it to final render as well. So we're not going to be using it this way. We're going to just render to this for now. So to render a range, you have to set it to render frame range, and then you have this range. And then you have, if you're new to Houdini, you have this really weird green text where you can actually modify, which is weird. Or if you modify it, it starts to get kind of weird, like what's happening here. What you should do is always just delete this, or if you wanted to use that expression, which is just using an expression, the frame start and frame end, which mean these guys here. If you drop this to let's say 124 there, that is actually that's the frame range, not the frame start. So that is not the frame start, so it's the frame range. It's actually this one. If I change to 120, you can see now this changed to 120. If you don't want to bother with changing the duration of your timeline, you can just delete this, delete channels, and just set whatever numbers you want there. And this is the step, how much frames you're gonna render. Like this case, gonna render every frame, one step. If you want to render every other frame, you can set this to 2 and render 1, 3, etc. Or if you want to render just every 10 frames, you can set it that. Depends. Sometimes it's useful for just setting quick render of the whole sequence and see if everything's fine. So now with this, that's basically all you need. Of course, saving to EXR, it's important because you want to save this render bars to the same file. If you don't, it's not gonna. If you don't use this, they're not gonna be able to save the render bars. Other things you need to consider, as I mentioned, is setting your camera correctly, your resolution, and that's it. Basically, all other settings for quality of the render will be here in the sampling or in another place if you're using another renderer. For example, in this case, we're gonna render with Arnold, which is gonna set the output image here. Let's say that actually we can copy it from here. Sadly, this doesn't have a place to select that. I could say sequence Arnold, just to be sure that I have this for Arnold, and this, of course, it's just gonna have to be called Arnold. It's gonna be where I'm gonna save my image, and then of course I need to change the frame range as well. Here I don't have the quality and all the other settings. We already set this on here. We have the render product here, and the render settings are here. And if I wanna render with Arnold, I'm gonna go here and say, well, I wanna have more camera settings or more transmission passes here. Let's say we actually do want that, or anything else you want to change, you can just set it here, and that is going to be picked up by this guy because it's having that, referencing that node there, right? So for the other renderers, it's going to be their specific output as well. For RenderMan, we have this render settings. Again, as the Karma node includes everything in one single node, you can just set it your properties here and render it with Karma here. With RenderMan. And for Redshift, you can set it here. Of course, this is going to have to be named Redshift out. And this will change to Redshift and set the path here, the render settings. and the render settings are going to come from this node, which we already kind of set up, and the render bars are going to be this one. And that's basically the way that you would export this. Let me just animate the camera 2. I'm going to animate just to have something that we can render with. So I'm going to go to range 120 and set a keyframe for this position and go to 1, go camera 2, lock it to move it. And I'm just going to move it back a little bit, just a little bit, and maybe just angle it a little bit. And that would automatically just set a keyframe. If you don't, you can just click Alt and click on the name to key all those parameters there. And in our case, there's not going to be, much stuff happening in this thing because this is a still life image. So actually, I don't like that rotating that much. So I'm just going to remove that rotation. So I don't think we should be doing this kind of a weird rotation. Maybe just zooming out a little, and that's gonna be it. Yeah, that's gonna be it. So now you can set up your that is set up actually, and now we can just say click one of these nodes. If you set render to this is gonna render it here in this Houdini session, so you're not gonna be able to use Houdini when you click render until it's done. The other thing you can do is actually render to disk in the background, which basically just means it's gonna save your scene. Well, you have to save your scene, and it's gonna launch a batch process in the background, and it's gonna start rendering that file in the background in another process. You can still use Houdini, but be aware that your machine is gonna be rendering, of course. So it's not gonna be the same as if your machine wasn't doing another thing. Well, but sometimes it's useful if you need to keep doing something else here, setting up some nodes and stuff. It's perfectly useful for that. So let me just render this sequence, and I'll see you when that is done. So to start the render, I'm gonna start here in the interactive render. The window that I'm working with. So when you click that, it's gonna pop this little window, which is basically the process of the render. You can see it's rendering frame 1 of 120, and it's gonna tell you how long it's been rendering, etc. So I'm gonna let this go. I'm gonna let this continue, and I'll see you when this is done. Okay, so after a few minutes rendering this, I had the final sequence here in Mantra. And as you can see here, this was a really low res, low samples render, but I wanted you guys to see some output. So you can see we also have all the passes here. We have the beauty unshadowed, so that's without any shadows. That's the depth map. The depth map sometimes seems to be white. You can press I to inspect this, but you can see there are values there. You see the value there at the bottom. You can see that is actually changing, and if you press this little icon here, which is just adapts the pixels to, you can actually see it. It kind of maps the whatever values there are from 0 to 1. Now you can see the values are actually there. You can see this is close and this is far, so there are actually depth values there. You can see only the diffuse, all the unshadowed, diffuse unshadowed, etc., glossy reflections. So everything is there and ready for you to do your compositing, which is what we're gonna be doing next. Great. So I just rendered a video of this to show you how it looks, and here it is. And this is the final preview that I did. As you can see, there's a lot of samples jumping on here. We need more samples for this, but you can see the animation is done. It's great, and everything is just working perfectly. It's just a matter of, seems like I like what I'm seeing, so it's more just a matter of getting more samples and doing a final render. All right, I will be doing some renders between lessons, and we'll join you in the next one for doing some compositing.